received them from Councillor Crompton, Councillor Jones, Alison Tongue, Vanessa Jardine and Tom McNeil. I've had an email from Paul Jennings PA to say he will be joining us in about half an hour because he's got another meeting, so he will perhaps join us around 2:30. But then we'd still be too short of the quorum.
Thank you, Wendy, that's helpful. And just for my benefit, if we're not quorate, could we go ahead with the meeting but without taking any decisions? Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, any decisions we can refer on to the CA board if they need to be approved.
And that would be a matter for the chair to decide?
Well, we just have the meeting, and I say the minutes would then go on to the CA board, and then they would ask them for the approvals if it's needed.
Okay, so just let me know when you want to get started. Are we still waiting to come along?
We've just had Jatinder Sharma join us, so that is another member.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Councillor Ali, if you want to take us through the start of the agenda, and then we'll double check how many people we've got on the line and whether we're quorate or not as we go into the substantive items, if you're comfortable doing that. Yeah,
that's absolutely fine. So I'll start the meeting. So hi, for those who I haven't met, my name is Councillor Wasim Ali. I'm Cabinet Member for Resources and Core Services at Sandwell Council. And today I'm stepping in for Councillor Crompton, who isn't able to be here with us today, but also your Deputy Chair, Councillor Bridget Jones, who also isn't able to be here today. So that's the apologies I have so far. Are there any other apologies that we need to note for the minutes?
Just those apologies, Chair, that I referred to earlier.
Okay.
If you want me to say those again, I can do.
As long as they've been noted.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, so do any members have any declaration of interest to declare at this point? Nothing to declare in relation to any of the items that will be discussed today? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to Chair's remarks. Okay, so there was a paper that was supposed to be brought forward to today's meeting on learnings for lessons from the lockdown and workshop, which was well attended by the board on the 9th of February. This paper hasn't still been circulated and will either be sent to the board members between the meetings for their thoughts at the next board meeting, if that's okay. And I'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting to be agreed and seconded. So I wasn't in attendance, so I present the minutes, and if there's somebody from here that was at the minutes to second the minutes, I'd be grateful. Anybody to second the minutes? Karen, was that a hand up? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. So any matters arising? I've not had anything brought to my attention. Is there anything else anybody wishes to raise at this point? No? Okay, awesome. So now I'll pass on to Ed, who will be on item 7. Ed, you're going before Claire, aren't you? Because
yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll pass over to Ed, who's going to be dealing with the PSR annual business plan, high-level deliberables, and that's page 11 to 18 of the agenda pack. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks very much, Chair, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the meeting this afternoon. What I would like to do is really just refer you to the paper that the Chair's just mentioned. And the recommendations are for you to consider the progress that we've made right up till this point in terms of last year's high-level deliverables, and have a think about next year's and endorse next year's high-level deliverables, and then we will provide an update on those at each future board meeting. I should say this is part of the process that automatic boards are now following the review and the single assurance framework is that we need to be bringing our high-level deliverables to you and reporting them to you on a regular basis. So it's great that we're able to do that this time, and we will continue to do that in the future. So in terms of the high-level deliverables for the current year that we're nearly finishing, there are, if you want to refer to, well, the first thing to say is that because of COVID-19, as with many areas of life and certainly the work of the combined authority, a number of changes were made back in September in light of COVID-19. And so we did at that point make some tweaks to the high-level deliverables, and they are found on page 13. But then from page 13 to page 14 and moving on to page 15 in the note, you will see a progress update against those revised high-level deliverables. Can I say HLDs from now on, if that's okay with everybody? I don't like three-letter acronyms, but high-level deliverables is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll just say HLDs from now on, and hopefully people will be familiar with what I'm talking about. So the HLDs for this year are by and large really it's been really good that we've been able to achieve most of them. They're green in most aspects. There are some areas where we have tinged them amber in terms of our rating because there are still bits and pieces that we need to finish off in the last month of the year, or where there are, in some cases, if you like, contingencies relating to the work of other organisations where, we have to collaborate with them, and that's, that has caused a bit of a hold up again due to COVID-19 and so on. But by and large, we have achieved all of our high-level deliverables for this year. I want to also draw attention to some of our key achievements, which you can find in paragraph 2.7. In particular, just to name a few of these, which I think are important and worth drawing our attention to. And again, recognise the fact that we've really had to adapt and change what we've done during the course of the year. The community recovery roadmap, I think, has been really important, and that took a huge amount of work sort of towards the back end of last year and now continues into this year. Linked to that, the Coalition on Digital Inclusion, which has now met for a second time, again, is something that has really come out of COVID that we've had to adapt and develop. The programme activity on rough sleeping, the RSA funding, which no doubt Neelan will refer to later on today, is something again that we've really mobilised very well in this past year and has been particularly successful. We're now looking at that rolling forward into the next financial year thanks to its success. We've also related to that done work with the Royal British Legion in working with them on designing out homelessness as well. We've worked with Solihull in particular around the inclusive growth framework and how that works in the context of Kingshurst. I think we're particularly pleased with the work that Claire and Anna have done in relation to that. One of the big kind of headlines from that work is the fact that 100% of that the housing being built within that development is now going to be affordable housing on the basis of the work that was done around how to embed the inclusive growth approach within that work. And we've done lots of work too with the social economy task force, which is now bringing forward its business plan. Lots of work around the way in which the voluntary and community sector have responded to COVID-19 and the learning through lockdown reports and the special meeting that we had a few weeks ago around that we are now planning to take forward as well. And indeed, then there's the work we've been doing jointly with the OPCC, both with the in relation to the punishing abuse work, which Claire will talk about later on today, but also then with the Violence Reduction Unit and the relationships that we've continued with them. So quite a lot, and sorry for me to be kind of listing it out, but I feel it's only fair to colleagues to give voice to the fantastic work that's being done and has been done, rather than just refer to these kind of rather abstract HLDs. So that's sort of work to this year. As I say, still a few big things to sort of finish off. Looking forward to getting the social economy business plan through. Looking forward to the commitment to collaborate coming through in the next few weeks. So still a few things to finish off, but by and large, a really good year despite all the challenges around COVID-19. Chair, perhaps if I just pause there before coming on to the kind of future. I don't want to kind of race through this. We're all right for time, I think, so I don't want to race through this. Has anybody got any questions in terms of what we've been able to deliver this year before I turn to next year and our plans for next year?
Got a question from Sue.
Hi Ed, how nice to see you. We're beginning to emerge from coronavirus and it's nice to be back in this conversation. I'm sorry we've been missing for so long. I just wanted to ask a question about the radical prevention bid, and that may well be, you may well be about to come onto it for this year, but obviously we've had that on the stocks for a while. You know, the world has changed kind of around us in the meantime, and I just wondered, you know, how and whether there was any progress on that.
Well, I will tell you straight how it is. We have updated that proposal in the light of COVID, and it was submitted as part of our CSR asks late last year. And didn't, obviously, well, CSR was not really what we expected, was it? So at that point, didn't get the traction we'd hoped for. But over Christmas and New Year, we have had some very positive noises, both at a ministerial level and also from colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care. We've had several meetings with them and addressed a number of particular concerns they had around the detail of the proposal. And as of last week, it was still with ministers for further decision. So I think it's fair to say that it's relatively positive, though we're a little bit disappointed it didn't come through the budget yesterday, because we thought that was an ideal opportunity for it to come forward. But I hope that gives you some encouragement, at least, Sue, that it's still alive and kicking, and you know, we are still in weekly conversations with colleagues in DHSC to try and move it forward.
Okay, obviously anything that we can do to help.
Yes, that'll be super. I'll absolutely let you know about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. Any further questions? No.
Okay. So I'll move on then to our proposed high-level deliverables for 2021-22. And I think it's worth just setting this in a little bit of context. And I have spoken at this board a couple of times before now about the way we're trying to shape the directorate as we move forward. So two things to say about that. One is that we've, if you like, clarified our core mission, avoided as far as we can using sort of public service speak and terminology, which we think is sometimes alienating for people, and talked very much about how we create a fairer, greener, healthier West Midlands. So that's absolutely our core mission now: fairer, greener, healthier. And we recognise that there's a lot of interplay between those three ideas. How do you create a fairer region? Absolutely relates to a healthier region, which in turn requires a greener region. So those three things kind of interplay, and we're really keen that we look at how we go about doing that as a whole system. This isn't a directorate that is just necessarily bringing in central government funding and delivering programmes, but in fact actually we're about unlocking the whole system to be able to together achieve that fairer, greener, healthier mission that we are all about. And so that, if you like, requires a slightly different way of thinking about how we approach our work. We, if you like, have got an offer to local authorities and to other partners in the region as something of a sort of social innovation change agency, you know, a resource that can support you to make changes around public service reform, whether that's sort of identifying need and opportunities and challenges in your localities, generating ideas for, you know, collaborative activity, bringing different partners together, forming partnerships and working groups and so on, coming up with pilot projects, working with you to develop those pilot projects, making the case, you know, once we've got a pilot project up and running, is there a business case that we can build on the back of that will attract funding either to that project or indeed to the combined authority to then deliver it. And then there's delivery and implementation, growing and scaling projects, and critically to all of this, making sure that the system changes as a result. So that's the kind of approach that we're developing. It's what I describe as a social innovation approach. It's not just about, just to be really clear, it's not just about trying to lever in large sums of funding from central government and deliver projects ourselves. It's absolutely about unlocking the fantastic resources that we've got across the region in order to transform our public services and create that fairer, greener, healthier West Midlands. So that's the kind of principle, if you like. And then based on that, and I ought to say, we've really done our best to exemplify that through the community recovery roadmap and the work we've been doing under community recovery. And through that work, we now have partnerships across 7 of the different themes within the community recovery roadmap, where there's a local authority lead, there's a combined authority lead, and they work together in order to take forward that particular theme with practical projects and experiments and research and so on. So to the high-level deliverables themselves, the first 2 high-level deliverables for the next year relate very much to the fantastic work that Neelam is leading through the Homelessness Task Force. Part of that is to continue to build on the work that they're doing already to design out homelessness. The second part is the grant-funded work, whereby we're supporting both the Rough Sleepers Initiative programme and also the Housing First pilot as well. So that's the second high-level deliverable. The third is around community recovery. I mentioned that a moment ago, and in particular, the work we're doing in the name of community recovery around digital inclusion. The fourth HLD is actually left open. We think there's still a lot of scope under the umbrella of community recovery to develop new projects with local authorities. So we don't want to, at this point, define what those new projects might be. We're very open to ongoing conversations as they come out of the community recovery discussions that are taking place through the RCG group. So that's, if you like, a holding HLD for emerging work. And again, very happy to be guided by this board as to what they think some of those kind of community recovery priorities might need to look like. The fifth HLD is analysis around early intervention. So we're really keen to put a big focus back on early intervention. What does that actually mean? How can we unlock efficiencies that need to take place within our local authorities, within other public service providers, if we attack problems at their root very early on, and particularly looking at sort of early years and what happens in that space. So we want to do some research around that initially, just to look at the opportunities, if you like, around early intervention and prevention, and probably bring work back to this board as to then what the next steps need to be in relation to that. And then we're particularly keen that the sixth high-level deliverable is around how we might unlock investment around a particular area of public service reform through some kind of innovation. And as you're probably aware, we are in the middle at the moment of a community recovery innovation challenge. where we've asked voluntary and community organisations, SMEs and others to put forward their own proposals for innovation, and some of them will win a small prize towards the further development of that innovation opportunity. This HLD really gives us some scope for driving one of those forward, or indeed for finding another type of innovation that we'd want to move forward. And we're keen that we might perhaps explore things like social investment bonds, the idea of a West Midlands Future Fund, a voluntary community sector, community resilience, community recovery fund that we're talking to government about. So there's a number of ways in which we might resource that, including the Radical Health Prevention Fund as well, which we're looking at. So that's the sixth HLD, is for an area of particular innovation that, again, we've yet to specify or identify, but again, that can come back to this board for decision once we have identified that. And then in terms of the inclusive growth aspects of our work, a number of high-level deliverables there. Embedding inclusive growth within the combined authority and its partners, and Claire will speak a little bit more about this, I think, later on in the meeting. But one of the things, for example, we're doing is we've just initiated an inclusive growth business partners programme. 20 people from around the organisation and indeed from partner organisations have put themselves forward as inclusive growth business partners, who will now work in their own neck of the woods, so to speak, to introduce inclusive growth principles in the kind of work that they're doing. Second HLD is around developing an inclusive growth task force and monitoring and evaluation. So we bring a little bit more crunch to the way in which we are monitoring and evaluating what different parts of the organisation are doing around inclusive growth. The third is again a sort of an opportunity. We're already working with Kingshurst and East Birmingham. We've got plans to work hopefully in the Black Country as well during 2021-22, and so we're committed to supporting local authorities and their partners with 3 what we're describing as inclusive growth in action initiatives. So like Kingshurst, like East Birmingham, but in other parts of the combined authority area as well. The fourth HLD is about unlocking investment in the social economy. And so we will soon publish the social economy business plan, which itself will be full of direction and activity as to what we need to do next. So that HLD will move that forward. And then we have suggested we might set up an inclusive growth corridors board. It's been an idea that's been kicking around for a little while now. We're a bit concerned about whether we will have the resource to do that. And so that's why it's greyed out at the moment, because I think as I go through all these things, you begin to realise we are biting off quite a lot in the next 12 months, and with a relatively small team, I think we need to be careful what we commit to and what we don't. So if I just stop there, very happy to take questions about that public service reform, community recovery and inclusive growth programme that we're planning for the next 12 months.
I'll hand over to members. Any questions, points anybody wishes to make to Ed? Karen?
Yeah, thanks Ed. Obviously the Kingshurst inclusive growth work is really key to Solihull and how we develop Kingshurst. And obviously we want to increase jobs and training, particularly in that area. We got some good news yesterday, so we creating more jobs over at the UGC, so that will be good for us, and the wider West Midlands, of course. I just really want to understand how it might, because one word that has not been mentioned in all of this is inequalities, and I'm just wondering how it will connect to the inequalities work that is being undertaken in many organisations, and we're particularly working now with the ICS, and I don't think Paul's on yet. So it's all around how this all interlinks.
Yeah.
Obviously we create jobs, we improve people's income, that in turn will help with their health and well-being. Obviously, we're all working on our own health and well-being strategies. It's just really how this will all interlink in that inequalities big piece of work that's going on literally everywhere. And this is the first board meeting I've been to that nobody's mentioned the word inequality yet.
Well, the fact that we haven't mentioned it explicitly, I will take as rebuke, but I apologise for that. But it is. Let me just reassure you that it is at the heart of all the things that I've just been describing, even if I haven't mentioned it explicitly. I think the other thing to say is that we have, if you like, inherited a combined authority governance structure which has separated out well-being, and it was great to see Councillor Seckham just pop up a moment ago with PSR and inclusive growth, and that's the governance structure that we've got. But I want to just reassure colleagues that the level of integration between the work we're doing on public service reform and inclusive growth and well-being and health inequalities is huge. And you know, I can see my colleagues on the screen now. Claire, Neelam will testify to the fact that our colleague Mubashir, who leads on our wellbeing and health inequalities work, we are a single team and we're working across these issues all the time, even though we report to different boards. So in kind of governance terms, I really wouldn't feel concerned, if you like, that it's not joined up. In practical terms, and I can see Claire's popped her hand up as well, and it'd be great for her to say some more about this. But in practical terms, when it comes to projects like Kingshurst or pieces of work like community recovery, again, inequalities is at the heart of it, and we don't make any distinction between the work of our wellbeing team and health inequalities and the work of our inclusive growth team and what they're doing. And I dare say Claire will be able to give us an example of that. The example I would give is from East Birmingham, where we've just put in a proposal to the Health Foundation to look at how a skills project in East Birmingham has big implications for the health of that community and vice versa. So we absolutely see it as integrated. But Claire, perhaps you want to build on that response.
Yeah, no, and it was only to provide a couple of practical examples, because we've had a really good workshop with Kingshurst just yesterday. In fact, it was a CCG-led workshop on how the new health facility is going to be designed, and actually very much taking into account who are the people in Kingshurst who are experiencing the worst health outcomes, and how do we make this the most inviting, community-focused space we possibly can. And it's getting right down into the granular detail now of like, what would make you want to come here? Could you be here if you didn't have money? Like, do you have the privacy you need, but also the welcome you need? So it's really kind of baked into everything that we're trying to do. And I think the next phase of what we're planning in Kingshurst is a kind of community engagement strategy for the remainder of the project timeline. So again, trying to think of those demographic groups who most need to benefit from this being done well, and making sure that we hear their voices and get their views in throughout, even if we can't currently stand outside the cup and speak to them directly, which actually, to be honest, we probably would want to do a bit of that if we could. But yeah, there's kind of lots in the pipeline. I can only assure, Councillor Grinsell that it's kind of baked into how we try to do inclusive growth. It's about identifying those humans who are just not having the best outcomes and trying to connect them to the investment that's coming in. And that's what we're always attempting to do in one way or another.
That's what I hoped. That's what I hoped you'd say, because yeah, the inequalities work can't be done on its own, and it has to be, right across the board. So that is good. Okay, can I just?
We're trying to do that more systematically as well. So the inclusive growth high level deliverables #1 in particular is all about making sure that we do that systematically in everything that we do. We can't expect Claire to pitch up at every single meeting, do you see what I mean, across the whole combined authority, all the local authority regeneration meetings, etc., and be talking about these issues. We need to make sure that we have the systems and processes through the combined authorities investment programme, through the way in which we are developing strategies and policies and so on, so that everywhere people have this sense of looking out for those who most need the kind of investment that we're seeing going into the region, it actually benefiting them. And so this is why we've got this now, this Inclusive Growth Business Partners programme, where we are literally training up 20 people all around the organisation to use the kind of tools and techniques that Claire uses.
Okay. And can I just ask what you were referring to when you talked about early years and early intervention? What were you specifically referring to then?
It's a research programme that we want to begin in order to explore what the opportunities are. Claire D, do you want to just say a couple of words about that?
Yeah, I think we're still not sure is the answer to that question, Councillor Grinsell, and I think we know that if you invest earlier in children's lives, you have better outcomes and prevent the type of crisis intervention that, for example, Neelam has been leading on with the homelessness response. So we know that we want to do, we know that we need to focus on that area in terms of early intervention and prevention and early years as kind of two separate things. So we're going through a design sprint process at the moment with a number of colleagues across a number of different organisations to help us shape what that work we'll need to be delivering on next year will be. One of the things, for example, that we're quite keen to do is to develop some regional baselining around cost benefit analysis tools. So if we were to invest in a particular project, how can we evidence to Treasury that we'll get our bang for our buck in the West Midlands and it's worth investing in, rather than waiting for 20 years, for example, for that intervention to play out. So it's being designed at the moment, but that's the kind of scope that we're looking at. And hopefully the multi-agency group who are helping us lead through that design sprint process to generate that particular programme of work next year. And then once we've got that sort of penciled out, we'll broaden out almost a bit of a steering group around that work going forward, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And bring it back to this board as well. I think, you know, once we've scoped it out, I think it needs to come back here for your consideration.
Yeah, and I think quite a lot of authorities, and certainly ICS too, first 1,001 days is really important. The other thing that's just come into my mind though is a few years ago there was a lot going on with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, so that may be an area that needs to come to the fore again, because it might have slipped back a bit, if you know what I mean. So that area might be good to look at.
So the work that we've done on punishing abuse, which we covered at the last board meeting, and I'll briefly update you on later, sort of builds on that ACEs model. And sort of adopts a systemic approach to how we might tackle some of those issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sue, do you want to come in?
Yes, if I may. So I'd like to pick up the inequalities theme as well, because I can see potentially how it's woven through across most of these deliverables. But I just wonder, and particularly going back to Councillor Grinsell's point about the ICSs and so on, whether it is worth, and there's a supplementary question here about how we engage our Directors of Public Health in this work, but whether there is a specific conversation that would be helpful with the ICSs, with each of the ICSs, because clearly we have a regional priority which is becoming embedded in all of the STP plans, and as they develop into ICSs, to have compelling plans about how inequalities are to be reduced. And there is an increasing head of steam around it, with some core themes around maternity and perinatal pathways and so on and so forth. So, you know, I think there is a significant amount of synergy. So I'm wondering, I know we haven't got STP representation here just at the moment, but is there a conversation that's worth having with the ICSs or with the STPs around this whole, you know, how do we maximise the synergies across with the inequalities agenda? And then just as a second point, looking at the community recovery projects, and I know there's more to come on the learning and so on from lockdown on this. But again, the same question about, you know, how is addressing the inequalities that COVID has highlighted and exacerbated, how is that going to be reflected across those community recovery projects? Because there's a huge opportunity to do so. But again, and forgive me, because I'm catching up to some extent, but I can't just see how that is reflected, at least not in the paperwork that we've got today.
Sure. Thanks, Sue. And I guess this is going to be a really annoying response to your question, so forgive me. But a lot of the questions that you're asking are being addressed through the Wellbeing Board rather than through this PSR and Inclusive Growth Board. The assurance I gave to Councillor Grinsell is the same assurance I'll give to you, that on a day-to-day basis, Mubashir, our head of wellbeing, is working with me, Claire, Neelam, every day on how the thing integrates. But in terms of reporting lines, and I can see Councillor Seckham has popped up now, that work is being reported into the Wellbeing Board as opposed to this particular board. I know that's a really annoying bureaucratic answer to what's a really important question. But just albeit this isn't the Wellbeing Board, I will just say that we have elicited 50 different commitments from different parts of the health system in relation to tackling health inequalities. And even this morning, we hosted a BAME roundtable where members of the community were quizzing members of the health system as to whether they are pursuing those commitments to tackling health inequalities. Alongside that, Mubashir, our head of wellbeing, sits on the STAR board working group on health inequalities. So he's trying to do that sort of integration around that as well. And out of both of those, we're working to bring forward a programme around how as a region we tackle health inequality, but we think that needs to be owned by that STAR board, because that's where it's going to be driven forward most of all. So we're kind of playing a role within that rather than driving that forward ourselves.
Yeah. And we're just about to set up the successor to the strategic thinking to implement the raft of inequalities priorities from the STAR board. So, and that, I know that Mubashir is part of that. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, Claire came in first, and then Isabel.
I think it was just a proposal, Chair. If going forwards, it might be helpful to have a bit of cross-fertilisation, a bit more explicit cross-fertilisation between this board and the Wellbeing Board, and perhaps either the Chair or Mubashir or myself could present sort of the key agenda items at each other's boards and the key discussions and agreements that those boards had reached.
I think that sounds like a really good idea, actually. I think what that then stops is any sort of crosswork going on, and any collaboration works that can begin. So certainly definitely a good, and I certainly, as chair for this meeting at least, would second that, but I think it's ultimately up to the chairs of the meeting when they come back. But yeah, certainly a very good proposal, and let's note it in the minutes for the chairs to consider at the next meeting. That's okay, and I can see that members are happy across the board from what I can see, so good suggestion. Isabel.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy with that. I think that's absolutely fine. I think, it's just to say this is a big piece of work, and it's really an important piece of work. It touches on many boards, actually, and what we need to do is gather the information to draw it together and to try and, it's not about owning it in one or other place. This is a piece of work that's going to be owned by the West Midlands, by all partners, which I think is such a valuable and important piece of work. So as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be about, ownership leading or anything. It should be about drawing together that information and getting the very best value of the work that we want to bring forward. I'm more than happy that this suggestion that Claire has made sounds really sensible. We can have that overlay, and we can draw all that information in and share it. I think it actually says to me how valuable this work is, that everyone wants to own it, and I think that's a fantastic piece of information. So, you know, let's get the best overlay from all boards that we can that will contribute towards it. So I think it's you know, really good news.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments on this particular item agenda? Nope. Ed, anything you want to say to round up?
No, just I'm assuming then that people are comfortable with those recommendations. Thank you for your comments. We'll take those away. And again, just to offer reassurance that within my team, the Fairer, Greener, Healthier work that we're doing is very much integrated, and we are working as a single team on tackling these range of inequalities in one approach. So even though it's reporting in different places, there is a very much a joined up approach. So thank you for your comments today.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you for everybody who contributed. So I'll go into the next item agenda 6, which is community recovery, and that's with Claire.
Yeah, I'm trying to share my screen. If somebody could let me know, because I can no longer see you, if you can see my screen. So
yeah, you can see a presentation.
Thank you. I just thought it'd be really helpful to do a quick recap around the community recovery work to remind colleagues the process that we've been through to date and where we're up to. So the first piece of work that we did back in June time last year was we convened a citizens panel, which was a group of residents in the West Midlands who were representative of the West Midlands. They heard from a number of experts. They talked about their experiences of lockdown at the time, and they talked through what they thought would be important to form part of our regional approach to community recovery. They came back with 6 priorities for community recovery and 4 cross-cutting principles. What we then did on the back of that was we asked all of our partners what activity you were undertaking as part of community recovery. So that included writing out to local authorities, anchor institutions, health colleagues, criminal justice colleagues, universities, voluntary community faith, social enterprises, some businesses, the LEPs, a number of other partners, and effectively asking you what your activity was around community recovery. We then synthesised that effectively into 3 sort of main buckets, really. The first bit was around what activity you had identified as a priority that you had a very clear plan or an idea for how you would manage, and probably already have the existing partnerships or resources to undertake that action. And we pulled out a number of examples of good practice where that was happening. In fact, there were 41 that went into the publication. There were many, many more that could have gone into the publication. The second bucket were those areas for community recovery where colleagues had some plans developing or had some partnerships developing, but recognised that there was probably some scope for collaboration, either across a regional footprint where that broader sub-regional or regional approach might be more beneficial, or where there were some complex partnerships that needed to be engineered or supported in a way that would have a bigger impact with that particular issue. And then there was a third bucket, which were issues, I guess, that had been exacerbated by COVID or by the lockdown, that colleagues either hadn't identified previously as a priority or knew were important but hadn't quite recognised the significance of some of those issues, and or which fell into that bracket of needing some partnerships establishing, understanding that it absolutely would be better done across a regional footprint. And so what we did as part of that was synthesised everything that you told us, which effectively ranged from a 95-page strategy document through to a couple of bullet points on an emails, depending on the people that were telling us what was important to them. And we pulled that together along with the commissioned work that we undertook, which included that piece of research looking at system responses, so the public service responses, the piece of research that we did with colleagues at the University of Wolverhampton who are on the line today, looking at the response in the voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector, and some work that we'd undertaken to look at access to green spaces. And we pulled that together with our existing publications, which are listed across the top there in terms of the Devo white paper submission, the comprehensive spending review submission, the work that that colleagues in the Wellbeing Board have led on around those regional the health inequalities that were borne out through COVID, and reflecting some of the national PHE research that was undertaken, but taking that West Midlands lens on it, and the recharge of the West Midlands document, which was our economic recovery strategy. We pulled that together into our Levelling Up the West Midlands Community Recovery Prospectus to Government and Roadmap document, which, as I say, highlights 41 areas of good practice. There could have been many more that we could have included in there. 29 asks of government, 15 areas for future collaboration, and 27 shared ambitions. What we then did was take those into development for business cases, some of the work around collaborative action and the Open Innovation Challenge. So this is just very briefly outlining that each of those 6 community recovery priorities, and then the cross-cutting principle of extra help to the most affected, have been the ones that the Recovery Coordination Group want us to take forward as particular pieces of work. So each local authority has nominated themselves as a sponsor for each of those pieces of work. There is a combined authority lead for each of those pieces of work, and usually a local authority lead as well. Some of that work is at very early stages, some is slightly more developed. Large parts of this work, because we're so very heavily reliant on working in partnership across the local authorities, has been stalled because of the pandemic response, because of the lockdown that happened in January, and the need for those officers to really focus on their core business. So there are some interesting pieces of work that are developing from that, but we're really at the start of that journey. You'll see from the report that the area of future collaboration that's really taken hold is that focus on digital inclusion and the Coalition for Digital Inclusion already, with a really clear programme of work developing around how we take that forward. 2 of the other areas for future collaboration that colleagues were really keen to see us progress was around re-establishing that relationship with the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector. And to that effect, we had a roundtable with Danny Kruger, the Minister, who had written a report on levelling up communities on behalf of at the request of the Prime Minister. And that fed into an £11 million proposal to government to help us develop some resilience in that sector going forward. And just highlighting that read across between the work that we do within the Directorate, looking at fairer, greener and healthier. One of the future areas for collaboration is really focusing on that health of the region, and what it would mean to become a Marmot City region going forward. I'll tell you briefly about the Community Recovery Challenge, the Innovation Challenge. So you've heard about this before. Sorry, the date on that slide is wrong. It has launched. It closes on the 21st of March. We've had over 50 entries already. This is we're aiming at grassroots organisations, but the competition is open to everybody, and we're looking for innovative ideas to help tackle one of 12 key issues, which I'll come on to next. The top 20 prizes will receive £500 cash prize and support at a business development masterclass to help develop their project or their idea to the next step. And the top 3 entries will receive investment and bespoke support to really put in place their proposal, their idea, up to the value of £15,000. So these are the ideas, or the areas that we're inviting ideas from, that really focus on some of those. At the start of my presentation, I talked about effectively 3 buckets. This is that 3rd bucket of some of those really challenging issues that have been exacerbated through the pandemic, that there is some really good practice happening around, but actually having some innovative ideas might help us take that to the next level. So that's sort of a very quick recap of where we've got to and what some of the priorities are. I guess our next steps are to think about how we knit together the community recovery work and the economic recovery work, and making sure that that interface between those 2 pieces of work are really clear, and we work in synergy across that with one voice into government. We will continue to progress those work streams, And our kind of internal next step, I guess, is making sure that we integrate the work through the learning from lockdown processes and research that we undertook, and making sure that's really embedded within the work of community recovery. So I hope that covers everything that was in the paper and everything that we wanted to focus on today. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that presentation, Claire. Thank you. Do we have any questions from board members? Nope. Any? Yes, Laura.
Thanks. Sorry, struggling to find the right buttons. Thank you, Claire, for that. Obviously, having been involved in some of that work, there's a couple of things that I'm really interested in. So, the first is that really pleased to see the fund that's out there, and good to hear that people have applied for that. So I guess the first question is a really easy one, that will the kind of outcome and some details about what happens with that come back to this board, because I guess I'd just be interested to see. Great. And the other one is I guess that ask, that the call that went into government for that 11 million, has there been a set response to that, and what is it? No. Okay.
So, Chair, if I can take those questions, we continue to advocate for that that resilience fund. It went in our comprehensive spending review ask. It went back in our budget proposals. We continue to work with colleagues in Treasury to try and turn that into a reality, but nothing further than warm words at this stage coming back. In response to your first question, it would be an absolute pleasure to bring that back to this group. We won't be able to announce the winners until after the elections, but the competition will be judged and the winners will be supported, and that work will continue. But we won't be able to publish the winners until after the election period has concluded. What we will be doing in the meantime, so there'll be 20 winners who get the kind of the £500 runners up prize, I guess, and then the top 3 prizes. There'll be a number of other winners who don't receive either of those prizes. And what we're keen to do, and what's established in a number of areas, is that we link those ideas through to their localities, through to local authority leads, so that they can help support those ideas, make those local links, and help foster and develop those ideas and turn them into a reality on the ground. So that work will continue.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have any other, Karen, who are coming in?
Yeah. So just to clarify then, you'll share all the applications with us, not just the actual winners and all of them, because there might be lots of ideas coming in that you know, as a local authority we could then look at with our community. You know, there's lots of different pots of money around, and as they come, as new pots come forward, we can then sort of have those projects potentially sitting in the background waiting and sort of, you know, helping to guide organisations. So you'll share it.
That's absolutely our intention, Councillor. We have asked all of the projects for their permission to share those details at a local level, and as we go through the process, that is my intention, that we'll link any Solihull proposals or any proposals that overlap with Solihull. It would be my intention to share it through with your officers in Solihull to do exactly as you described, so that you can link them with local initiatives.
Yeah, brilliant. That's perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Ed?
Yeah, just to be 100% clear, because it's been implicit but not explicit, I want to make it explicit. In sharing those projects, that won't involve this board in decision making, because there's a separate panel that will be involved in the decision making as to who wins, but we can share the information with people. I just wanted to be really clear, in case members of the board thought that we were actually suggesting that this board would take decisions on the winners.
No, I'm thinking further down the line, later on, once it's all decided what the others were, or you know, all the people that weren't successful, but there are other avenues we might be able to use for them.
Okay, So I guess, look, I think the main thing, I think it's really important for all of us to be promoting the Community Recovery Innovation Challenge within our workplace and local authorities. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and obviously comes with some very generous prizes as well. So definitely worth promoting. I think the other thing is, when we're looking at community engagement, certainly in the last year or so, with with COVID and now the vaccine, this is not just an issue for one particular community. This is all communities coming together, all chipping in to make sure that all communities are looked after. And it's all about having that one purpose, one people vision, that that we are all humans, that we are all the same people, and as communities coming together, showing that just because there's certain communities down on the stacks and other communities, or certain communities cases are higher than the other communities, doesn't mean that we're different or anyway different to each other. We are very similar in what we say, but in terms of giving confidence to communities, I think is really important. If there's nothing on that, I'll go to item 8, and that's Homelessness Task Force, Children and Families Task Group with Neelam. Thank you. And thank you, Claire, for that presentation.
Thank you. I'm just going to try and get my slides up. And hopefully you should all be able to see that. So what I'm going to try and do this afternoon is give a bit of an update on some of the more recent work that the task force and the members advisory group has been exploring and discussing. So just as a bit of a recap, really, so from kind of the onset of the Homelessness Task Force, our ambition has always been to design out homelessness in all its forms. And I think it is fair to say that in recent years, a lot of our activity has been in that rough sleeping space. We did see a peak in our rough sleeping back in 2018, and a lot of the activities and funding that we've attracted as a region has also been in the rough sleeping space, because that's very much where kind of government is focusing on in kind of crisis and prevention. So, as a region, we've done lots of work jointly around the Housing First pilot, which now has had 355 individuals come into accommodation. We've also worked with 4 local authorities to roll out an alternative giving scheme called Change into Action, which is all about educating members of the public around, giving to a safe and secure scheme so that rough sleepers can be helped off the streets for good, rather than giving to individuals that are begging. And of course, our local authorities have attracted rough sleeping initiative funding, as has the WMCA. And through that, we have managed to commission lots of very good services to support those people that are rough sleeping and at risk of rough sleeping. And in the last year, I reported in the last board meeting, we have all pulled together, and it has been very much a public health response to rough sleeping in the sense of bringing everyone in. And I think it is fair to say that our local authorities and wider partners have done a fantastic job. And last week, the official statistics that come out every year to show a snapshot showed that in our region, we had a 62% reduction in rough sleeping. And I think that is a significant achievement, especially when you compare that reduction to, say, the national figures, which was a 37% reduction. And then if you look at that and compare it to the wider West Midlands, that compared at 33% reduction. So I think, it's fair to say we're going in the right direction. I think Councillor Thompson, Chair of MAG, is also on the call today, and I think she'll agree with me to say that we know that we've done a good job, but we know we can't stop there, because going forwards, we know there's other reasons around homelessness where it could increase, and we are calling on government to continue supporting our local authorities so that they can continue supporting those that fall into rough sleeping, but also to do more work in that prevention space so people don't have to turn and go into rough sleeping before they get help. And so our regional rough sleeper task group now in this coming year will be looking at an action plan which is very much in that kind of universal and targeted prevention space. And we want to do some work on understanding the flow into rough sleeping. And and how we can stop journeys into rough sleeping and where we can help upstream. So that's what we're kind of doing in that rough sleeper space. But what we are also now seeking to do is to look at what can be achieved as a collective in the children, families and young people space. We are kind of looking ahead, and as a task force, our assessment is that visible homelessness, which is your rough sleeping, is really only the tip of the iceberg. And we set out in our COVID-19 positioning statement that we feel there will be future reasons for homelessness, and some of those are as a result of the pandemic and what's been going on in the last 12 months. We know that people will be accruing rent arrears. We know that people have lost employment or have been furloughed and therefore have lost income. We also know that there has been an increase in domestic abuse across the region, and that leads to, kind of risk of family and relationship breakdowns, which are all reasons for why more people may come into homelessness as this year and following years progress. And the reason we want to look at this and why it's so important is because this is all set against a backdrop of existing need. So as a region, we have high numbers of individuals and families in temporary accommodation. So we know that if our predictions are right, then more people will be needing our local authorities' support. But that is against a backdrop of existing need, and therefore we need to think and look forward and make the case around what sorts of initiatives, what sort of support do we need to kind of support our children, families and young people that have been most affected by the pandemic. So what we've been doing in that space, so firstly, we have absolutely welcomed the eviction ban and the subsequent extensions to it, but we are aware that this could be bottling up demand. What we have asked for, and quite clearly, is some sort of kind of funding for like a temporary rent support scheme for those who have accrued arrears during COVID-19. So that people don't lose their homes, and that hasn't been forthcoming. We saw in the budget yesterday there was nothing around those households that might have accrued arrears, and therefore we feel that once the eviction ban is lifted, there may be lots of households that are at risk of becoming evicted and therefore becoming homeless. So what we did back in October, because what we kind of predicting this, but we don't know what the scale of that issue might look like for us to be able to plan going ahead. So we did some initial analysis using methodology similar to Shelter, and we also did like a quick poll of our registered social providers just to say, how many of your households have come into rent arrears since last March. So we did this in October, and at that point, very, very quick poll, we were looking at sort of 8,000 households, new households that had come into rent arrears since March, and we kind of feel that that number's probably increased since we did that quick research. So what we've now done is we've commissioned our Office of Data Analytics to do some further data analysis so that we can more confidently predict the scale of rent arrears by area. And we're looking at the impact and interaction of like 7 key indicators. So we're looking at things like, the number of furloughed jobs in an area, the number of households with lone parents, income. So anything that we feel might have the potential to increase the risk of a household getting into rent arrears and therefore the associated risk of eviction. And the reason we're doing all of this is because we want to make a compelling case to government to lobby around households so that they are supported to retain their tenancies, and also to influence where we need to make investment and in interventions in our region. We're also looking at a couple of models that could help to support households that have got into rent arrears but could be supported and not removed from their houses. So we're looking at something called a recovery tenancy pilot, and we are looking at how that might work in a social investment bond model. And we've also Birmingham and Coventry and Solihull have been looking at how they might be able to use direct lettings to also help with the number of households that we've got in temporary accommodation. And against all that backdrop, we've also commissioned a piece of quick direct action research for families in temporary accommodation to understand those journeys into temporary accommodation, to understand the stories of those that are currently in TA, to kind of, again, look at where can we do that prevention work to have kind of better effect. And all of this we will be linking into that kind of broader community recovery activity that Claire spoke about, and also the impacts for public service reform. And so what we've done is we've refreshed our children, families and young people task group, and all of this work will sit in the remit of that specific task group, much like the Rough Sleeper task group, who will have that focus on children, families and young people, with the key objective being that as a collective, we want to reduce the number and time households spend in temporary accommodation and increase the number of households across our region that are in secure and affordable accommodation. OK, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? No. Yes, Sharon.
Thanks, Wasim. It's not really a question because I chair the cross-party group for the homelessness on this, but it's just really a comment, really. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Neelam and the team that have been working on this, because a phenomenal amount of work's been done on this and a huge amount of achievements been done across the region. And it has helped us to find out some level of consistencies as well as best practice across there. So thank you to Neelam and everybody else. But also just for it to be noted, actually, that the way that we've actually worked on this around homelessness in the format that we have and with the structure that we have, the actual outcomes that have come out of it compared to some of the other streams that we see across the combined authority. You know, it's been a very different standalone type of way that we've worked, and I think it's really worked very well. The thing around temporary accommodation, I think that's essential, that we need to look at that strand next, and also just making that point and really stressing the point that we have not seen the tip of the iceberg when it comes to COVID-19 and the fallout for housing. What's to come down the track can be quite difficult, and if we do not as a region get into a real prevention space, we're going to have a lot of problems in about 2 years' time in all areas of homelessness. So I think we are heading in the right direction. But my key thing was just to say thank you to Neelam and the team for the phenomenal amount of work that they're doing.
Thank you for your support, Councillor Thompson, and all other MAG members, because I don't think we could do it without you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? No, thank you very much, Neelam, for the presentation, and great to see the work that's been happening. Great to so there's a comment on the chat for you, Neelam. So we'll move on to verbal reports, and we've got a verbal update from. So we've got 3 verbal updates: inclusive growth, punishing abuse, and socio-economic business plan. The first one is inclusive growth, and that's with Claire Spencer. Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And social economy business plan is nested within inclusive growth, so I will do all 3 of my updates at once, if that is okay. So I will start with the social economy business plan. So those of you who've been here a little while will remember that this originates from the work of the Social Economy Task Force. Now, that was a time-limited task force, and it launched in January 2020. And their recommendations form the basis of this business plan. So it is a business plan to deliver these recommendations, which were made by this independently led task force. So this plan is being pulled together by a consortium of social economy organisations led by ISE, who many of you will know. And they're into the second part of their work with us now. So they've done their kind of baseline work. and they are working to uncover the factors that lead to both stability and growth in the social economy, and trying to weave them into a plan that we can adopt at different spatial levels and use in different ways. So having produced that evidence review, they're currently running around 20 in-depth interviews with social enterprises and other organisations that trade for social good, just to understand their needs and aspirations and what they would need to see in a business plan like this. And those interviews will be combined with their existing research to create a first draft of the business plan. And this is what we'll be taking out to different stakeholders, including local authorities, LEPs, universities, and others. So I'm already trying to make sure that this work connects to the burgeoning social enterprise strand of Sandwell's Community Wealth and Economic Resilience Board. I think we've got a meeting on that coming up in the next couple of weeks. And I'm obviously very happy to bring this to the first PSR board on the other side of the election. Second update from me is on the Inclusive Growth Business Partners. So Ed referenced this in the conversation on the HLDs. And as you will recall, this is about bringing people together from different functions. Excuse me, and my cat is trying to eat my leg as I talk to you. So if I cringe lots, it's not because I hate my work. And we've recruited quite broadly from finance, comms, regeneration. And yes, it is about us kind of sharing our learning from the combined authority, but actually it's about us all learning from one another on how we apply inclusive growth in practice, including by collective problem solving and sharing what has worked. We have successfully recruited 21 inclusive growth business partners into the first cohort, and that includes external partners such as the Black Country Consortium, the West Midlands Growth Company, and GBS LEP. So we will have induction sessions with those business partners very shortly, and they will have all met for the first time as a big group in the first month or so. And we will be looking to review how successful that has been after the first 6 months. What you could do for us at this stage is that we really want to reach out into the region to share inspiring practice with this network. So if there is something that's going on in your authority that you're really proud of, that we can learn from and share with our business partners network, please do share it with Anna and I. We have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, but we're always willing to learn more and find out more. Sorry. Ooh. Yeah, cat. Finally, the final point I wanted to raise was about supporting more of the region. So I hope that Councillor Kettle would be here for this because he was particularly focused on this matter last meeting. But essentially, it very reasonably comes down to we want to make sure that we share the capacity we do have on inclusive growth with more areas of the region. So while we support Solihull and Kingshurst and Birmingham on the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Strategy, we're also trying to explore a couple of other things as we go along. So in Sandwell, we've been supporting you in establishing your anchor network, and we're on the recruitment panel for the anchor network coordinator. And once that person is in post, I think we've committed to just doing whatever we can to make sure that's a really big success. And I know that's massively important to a lot of you on Sandwell Council. And we're also liaising with officials on the ground to make sure if there are any current investments that you'd like us to be more involved in there. And then finally, around Dudley Interchange. So Ed and I had some meetings with our colleagues in TFWM and in Dudley Council, just to assess whether there's more that we can do to unlock the inclusive growth potential of that investment. So those of you who go to Combined Authority Board will be aware that the full business case for the interchange has been passed. So while there's some bits that we can't influence, actually in the kind of construction and build phase, there's an awful lot that can be. So our offer is on the table with them now, just to say, and we will await to see if there's anything we can do to add value there. And I would only finally say that our watchword is local leadership is what counts, and we're just here to add value. We're definitely not here to ride roughshod over things that are being led very well at local level. Great, and that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Claire. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Claire? Looks like you're going to be let off lightly, Claire. Thank you. And that's to punishing abuse, and that's Claire, different Claire.
Yeah, we have a policy in our directorate that you have to be called a Claire to be given a speaking slot, or Neelam, at our board. So thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Colleagues will remember the punishing abuse presentation that Tom McNeill and I from the PCC's office presented at the last board meeting. Just as a reminder, punishing abuse is a unique and groundbreaking piece of research into the extent of childhood adversity, looking at abuse, loss and trauma in children in the criminal justice system in the West Midlands. So the problem that we were trying to solve with this piece of research was a rhetoric that children in the West Midlands in the criminal justice system were more challenging and complex than they ever had been, and yet nobody could tell us what those challenges or complexities were. So we undertook it as a piece of action research. We trained up nearly 100 practitioners across the West Midlands, and they then looked into their own cases. So we trained them in research methodologies, and we trained them in understanding adversity, abuse, loss, trauma and attachment in particular. What we've seen is that this approach has taken a swell of activity in local teams in adopting change within their own sphere of influences. So within youth offending services, targeted youth support type of teams, looked after children teams, transition and leave and care services. Because the research was undertaken jointly across the local authorities, the CA and the PCC, we've got that really strong cross-party support, really strong regional support. The report has been completed, as well as a joint policy response between the Combined Authority and the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. They will both be published on Friday, the 12th of March. We are having a soft launch on Monday, available only to practitioners, and then the formal launch, which is a national launch that the PCC and Mayor are jointly hosting with the former Children's Commissioner Anne Longfield and a number of other special guests making an appearance on the 12th. I will put in the chat bar the Eventbrite link, and Wendy, I will ask you to send it out with the minutes of this meeting, or as quickly as we can after this meeting, if colleagues would like to come. I'll give you some headlines from the research, just so you've got an understanding of the types of adversities that we found through the research. So we had just under 63% of those children who were living in poverty or debt. 90% of the children in the study had received a social care intervention in their lives. More than half were eligible for free school meals, which suggests that they're 3.5 times the national average. Just under 50% are or had been looked after children. About a quarter had confirmed self-harming, attempted suicide or suicide ideation. Over half had been subject to referrals to mental health services, although very few had engaged. Significantly high numbers of a diagnosed health or disability condition, so about 26% in that cohort. 30% had been assessed as having special educational needs, and we believe that is an underestimate. And incredibly, 79% had attended 2 or more secondary schools. One child in the sample, one child in the West Midlands, had attended 25 different schools in their educational career. And a couple of stats around their families. So 79% were confirmed as experiencing family violence or child abuse. 29% had a child with a physical ill health impediment. 57% had a parent with a known or suspected mental health issue. 56% had parents with a current substance misuse issue. So some really powerful stats around those children, and the title for the report, for the work of punishing abuse, is quite deliberate. What some of the recommendations speak to are around achieving a level of system reform that means that we invest differently in the system so that we prevent children from entering the criminal justice system in the first place. So that type of remodelling of the way that children in the system are dealt with, which will involve working with adult substance misuse services, for example, adult mental health services, that mean that we take a different approach to how we identify those children early on. And going back to the earlier conversation with Councillor Grinsell about what is it around early intervention and prevention or early years provision that we would want to do differently, it weaves really nicely with this piece of work and the recommendations that argue for a need to tackle broader structural issues, including poverty, social inclusion and intergenerational disadvantage, as well as tackling those individual factors that lead children to go up that escalator of the youth justice system. So I'll pop the Eventbrite link into the chat, and as and when the report is published, we'll send those details round as well. I'm happy to take any.
Thank you, Claire. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Claire on that item? No, I just been noted of comments from Tom O'Neill. So the purpose of the minutes, I'll just read them out. So obviously he was unable to be here today, but he makes 3 points in relation to: number one, the research is incredibly powerful for demonstrating the depth of hardship endured by many children who end up in the criminal justice system, including the role of poverty, mental health, substance misuse and substance misuse problems in the household. Number two, the fact the findings are contemporary, in-depth, focused on the West Midlands, and conducted by practitioners locally means it is powerful evidence for pushing public health approaches in criminal justice that are sensitive to this childhood trauma, and we have tangible ideas on how to make towards. This is shown in the policy response note. And third and finally, the response. So the research is a great example of cross-party and interagency collaboration. So there are the comments from Tom. Does anybody else have any further comments or questions on this item? Nope. Okay, thank you very much, Claire. So I'll move on to any other business. And I only have one item to mention. It's just that any future meeting dates obviously have not been diarised as yet, and will be following the following the elections in May. If there's nothing else, I'll close the meeting. No, well, thank you very much all for attending, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute, Chair. It's very much appreciated.
It's okay. Thank you very much. It's been a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.